And I'm gonna be high.
Good on you, Donald. I'm the Rocket Man, yeah.
I'm a rocket man. And I'm gonna be
Rocket Man.
I'm a rocket man.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Logistics. Today I've got Clay Curran. Did I say that right? CEO,
That's right.
co-founder of FreshX,
Yep.
which is, I will let him explain, but my best explanation is a platform to access LTL reefer carriers, but they automate the access to them and the quoting. And if anybody has ever tried LTL reefer, they know the biggest problem is that you don't know what it's going to cost and you don't know which carrier can cover a specific lane for a given shipment. Sure, you can go to Frozen Food Express and get contract lanes, but that's all that's ever been available. And so now FreshX is kind of changing that game, but kind of a windy path to get there. It'll be kind of fun to dig into that. Clay, where do you live?
Yeah, and thank you for having me on. I live in Chicago, in Wicker Park. I originally come from New York, so I grew up in Westchester County, New York.
Oh, nice.
Worked in New York City for a few years, and then moved out to Chicago, I guess 4 years ago now. So it's flown by, but
Did you move to
Chicago,
Chicago
Chicago
because of
native now.
freight, or did you just end up there?
I came to Chicago for business school, and started the company actually in business school, and spun it out once I graduated.
Sweet. That's awesome. So you started out in Westchester. You tried to crash the economy for a few years, then you decided to come into freight instead.
Yeah, I
Sums it
worked
up.
I worked in financial services for a little while, and financial
There you go.
services is so removed from the real world problems that people are
Yeah.
facing, and you feel it's not very rewarding compared to supply chain, which is like you got your hands on real world problems, you can solve things that impact people every day. So
Yeah.
I think it's a more exciting space to be in.
For sure. Freight is an exciting space to be in always. The last 4 years, if that's what I'm tracking, 2 to 4 years is where you kind of got into this, has
Yeah.
been nothing short of exciting. All right, let's see here. Let's go through, instead of starting with what FreshX is, how did you get to FreshX? Even why'd you name it that? Like, how'd you end up doing a software company? You didn't start there.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll try to keep a very long and windy story kind of abbreviated, but we started out as a last mile delivery business for food and beverage. A lot of that direct to consumer perishable is like one of the hardest nuts to crack.
Yeah.
And so we were trying to solve it through reducing the amount of packaging you need in direct to consumer perishable, which is super expensive. Um, and we're trying to do that with more of like end-to-end supply chain path optimization, where you transport the products on refrigerated trucks and then pack them into uh, like refrigerated sprinter vans for the last mile. Um, and we were pursuing that for a little bit. We ran some pilots, but then we eventually pivoted and decided to just focus on the middle mile piece and start a freight brokerage. So that was probably late 2023, early 2024. And we got a broker authority, didn't really know what we were doing, but
Yeah.
we just started slinging freight. And so um, got an advisor who kind of helped us out along the way. But we got a few customers, and we learned pretty quickly that if we said, can we quote your reefer LTL to a food and beverage company, they would be pretty happy to talk to us. And
Yeah.
that was how we got off the ground as a freight brokerage, was through this reefer LTL strategy.
Yeah, you picked
So
the hardest problem in LTL. And
yeah,
I would say, and I say that being the guy who does big and bulky residential LTL, reefer's even a different animal. And so
yeah,
you picked that. And, for all that's said in the industry about cold calling and prospecting and being able to, call somebody and say, I have a carrier in X area and I can run this lane for this amount, whatever your strategy is, calling and saying that you can do reefer, no one cold calls with that.
yeah,
And so I would imagine you had some phone calls where it was like, I don't believe you. But if you're telling the truth, we can look at it.
yeah. Yeah, and it was a great way to get customers to get on the phone with you and and talk to you. But even as a specialized freight brokerage that we made this our niche and our thing, it was still really hard
Well,
to get rates from carriers because we knew who the carriers were, we knew who to contact for a quote, but we still had to when we had a frozen shipment out of Chicago, we would still have to go to all the Chicago carriers, the 5 to 10 carriers that we thought might be able to cover that lane,
yeah,
and ask them all for a price quote.
over
And then
email.
we'd
So,
over email, yep. And we'd hear back from them like several hours later, maybe we never hear back from them because they're getting all these emails all day long, and
yeah,
so we it was this really clunky process, and by the time we get back to the shipper, they already found an option.
yeah,
Um,
super
and
competitive. Like it's got to be quick and it's got to be like you got to have it in
yeah,
hand. It's pretty difficult.
yeah. So it was so even as a specialized provider, we were like, this is really hard to do. And we had a need for a product where we could get instant rates and figure out which carriers are going to be best. We, even when we were sending the emails, we're bugging the carriers all day long. We're sending them like 50, like all
Yeah,
these emails for loads that we don't have in hand, that we don't, we only one of them is going to win it, maybe. And so we said, it would be great if we could just get the rates from the carriers instantly and be able to know who can do what,
yeah,
and then send them an order when we actually have the order and the shippers agreed to the rate. And it sounds simple, but it required a lot of work. We had to well, we decided to shut down the brokerage and build this product
yeah.
essentially. And in order to do that, we had to go around, talk to a lot of these carriers, meet with them, and get them to buy into this idea. And eventually, we got enough of them on board that we were able to launch what is now a software company, FreshX.
Awesome. And did you go, I don't know what stage you guys are in, but I assume you had to go get funding to do the
Yeah.
software side. Had you already had funding for the brokerage and pivoted it, or was this a whole new venture?
Yeah, we did. We had a little bit of funding for the brokerage. We were in an accelerator program, so there was a little bit of funding, but we were pretty cash constrained. So it was once we switched to software, fundraising got a bit easier.
Yeah, I
There's
imagine.
raising money for a freight brokerage is not is not that easy
Especially in
these days.
2023 and
So
2024,
yeah,
convoy. So,
yep, yep. So yeah, once we made the switch to software, that the path was, we wanted to first, we had to get enough carriers to buy into this and agree to work with us.
yeah,
We built a little minimum viable product with a few carrier partners, and that was enough for us to close around, get funding, bring on some developers, and then build out the full product.
yeah,
So,
and I'm sure you're still building and iterating, and it's
oh
it's
yeah,
launched now. But talk me through, or maybe I'll talk a little bit about it. So, LTL reefer, it's almost a mix between truckload and LTL because they are LTL shipments. They're less than 6 pallets typically, but normally the solution has been just buy the whole truck because it has to be temp controlled and you can't really
hmm
commingle it very well. There's only certain specialized carriers who will commingle it. And then it's the equation of if it has to be frozen, that's one thing. If it has to be temp controlled but can't be frozen, now it's a whole different thing. And so that whole industry's you're able to go to the carriers and you basically got tariffs or rack rates. And instead of having a contract rate on one lane, you were able to get it from what I was able to get from you before the show. It's nationwide coverage. You have like 80
yeah,
carriers now. And that's a huge difference. And so a broker like Rocket, we don't use your platform yet, but now I'm interested. So a broker could go in there, access it. If they had a frozen load, instead of sending 40 emails and then following up 40 times, they can just get a quote and try to win a load, which is
yeah,
very similar to a buy, sell, and truckload, where you're saying, hey, I can quote you this price. Now I got to go to DAT or Truck Stop and find a carrier for this.
hmm
Those tools made it easier to see rate history. It's a rate product, right? DAT IQ and all that stuff. But this tool is more of a tariff because it's more LTL style. It's a pretty cool mix. I don't think there's any
yeah,
other platform like FreshX unless I'm just missing the boat on that.
yeah. I think you're right. So yeah, the product we've aggregated tariffs across. I think we have 82 carriers now, so it's nationwide coverage. We have some cross-border Canada coverage as well, but we're running
Nice.
at about 97% coverage of the searches that folks are running on the platform. We have at least one carrier 97% of the time that's
Awesome.
quoting it. And we've aggregated the tariffs across all those carriers and worked with them. It's really like a consulting project where we're,
Yeah.
we're pulling up maps on the screen and we're cutting out little regions and zip codes and making sure we're pinpoint accurate in terms of where they service and where they don't. We collect all the information around what temperatures they run at, what commodities they haul and what they don't haul, what they have permits to haul, and sometimes that's down to the lane.
Yeah.
Certain lanes they run frozen, certain lanes they run chilled. So we've mapped all that out and built a standardized engine around it so that we can feed all that data into our platform and carriers can go in and update it. And then for freight brokers, it's just like Google Flights for Reefer LTL, where you can
Yeah.
run a search and get back all the carriers that can do it, instant price quotes, and send them an order.
Yeah, where LTL traditional was more like an Expedia, this is more like a Google
Yeah.
Flights because you're just brokering the relationship with software.
Yeah.
Like you're giving the brokers access to the carrier, but once the transaction starts, then they're working with that carrier.
Yeah.
And from what I heard from you, it's a subscription to the platform instead of a transaction fee, which is much different than most of the freight tech space. Everything's a transaction fee these days.
Yeah, we went with a subscription model. It's usage based.
Hmm.
So different brokers who are different sizes are going to subscribe to different tiers, but it's a usage based subscription. And the reason we did that is we didn't want to have to police transactions and force people to transact on our platform.
Yeah.
We'd rather position ourselves as a more of a neutral visibility tool where the value that we bring is helping brokers figure out which carrier to use on a certain lane, but it's not really the transaction side of things where we want a broker to be able to find a carrier for New Jersey outbound and then work with that carrier directly and set up their own tariff if they want to and just
See,
set up
that's
a
the difference
contract with that
too.
carrier.
I like that approach. That's very, I would say, counter to the narrative of what most freight tech companies do, and they want to build a moat, right? And
Mm,
so the transaction fee not only is a good way to monetize because it's volume based and you always make a transaction fee, but it's also you kind of have to use the platform to transact with the carrier. But I
mhm,
think what freight tech companies miss on that, and it's kind of a refreshing take that you have, is that then your system has to perform for every type of customer. And you always are taking in change order requests and feature requests and bug fixes. And if it doesn't work, they're like, I'm paying you for this system to work. And then you get the sprints get backed up to 3 week sprints instead of, early releases. That's pretty much what
mhm.
happens. Because if everything
Yeah.
has to happen in your platform, then you have to build out tracking, visibility, invoicing, load factoring with the partners, all of that. It's kind of an interesting take.
Yeah, and I think we will probably build out some of that down the line. Optionally, if you
Yeah.
want tracking, we'll set up the right connections with the carriers and you can ping those APIs and get tracking updates. Definitely something we can help facilitate, but we don't want to bind our customers to using the platform in a certain way. We want it to be a visibility tool that they can use to get quotes and get market intelligence, but they don't have to use it a certain way. And we don't want to be involved in the transaction because then that's just messy. We're competing with our customers and our
Yeah, then you're
partners,
a
and
marketplace.
yeah, and we'd rather just not be competing with anybody, but just be facilitating communication, collaboration.
Yeah, actually, I think that we talked about it earlier too. A lot of what we covered in the beginning is coming up again, but competing with, so like, this is what a lot of companies get wrong. And that's actually like a big problem in the industry is that carriers will share some info with a broker, but not enough for you to build out this product and fix the issue. That's why you
Mm,
pivoted to software so that you weren't a competitor to the carrier. You weren't going after the same customer base. And
yeah.
in LTL, that's pretty muddy. Like some carriers are the big LTL carriers. they use third parties, but if they're direct with a client and you have a sizable spend with that carrier, they don't really care. They're like, this is our client, don't talk to them, don't offer other carriers to them. It gets real messy. So they'll share enough. Lance Healy's got a company called FreightFax. It's like a shipper
Mhm.
credit score. I just had a call with him last week, and he had a similar experience where it's like you got to be able to get the right amount of data from the carriers, and you have to be friendly with the brokers. It's a fine line. But if you're a software company, you can do it. If you're a brokerage, it's pretty hard to do that. So it's a pretty interesting path that led you to software. Are you a technical founder? Like, do you code?
I can write code. I can review code. I don't write code today, so we have in-house developers um, who are doing all the work. We have a head of engineering and then two other developers that are full time. But I'm able to communicate with them pretty well because I have a somewhat technical background. So
Yeah.
yeah, but not a technical co-founder myself.
I think that helps though to have a technical background, even when you're just architecting the product and trying to understand. I think a lot of what I talk about in this podcast with CEOs and founders is like, how do you run your business and what role do you play in it and what's the best strategy, mistakes made. But one of the things is that you have an advantage because you can say, hey, feature request. And without going to the devs and saying, hey, how long will this take? You kind of have an idea of the effort involved in building something. And I
Yeah.
think that a non-technical at all, right? You don't have any technical expertise. You're like, hey, ship the product faster. That typically is always a power balance. But I've seen, at least from what I've seen from the other people I've had on and other uh, people I know in the industry, somewhat technical founder is always a good choice.
Yeah.
So you understand the
Yeah,
product
and
roadmap.
yeah, just somewhat technical, understanding how much work goes into this stuff and why something's going to take a really long time. I can kind of like scope out a few different ways we could build a feature and then recommend that we do it a certain way because I know that if we do it a different way, it's going to increase a lot of scope somewhere else in the product, or I know that doing a certain thing just ends up making the back end a lot more messy. So it's
Yeah.
very helpful. Yeah. And
Yeah. You can
apologize, my
avoid
my
technical debt.
headset's.
So you start FreshX. Did you start with a co-founder? Did you start on your own and find a technical co-founder? What did that process look like?
Yeah, so I started this actually my co-founder is Lance, and we started FreshX together. We also started the last mile delivery business together. So
Okay, so you guys have been boys.
we went through this whole windy journey together for a few years, and um, yeah, we just kind of stuck it out, and but we initially started working on it together just because we wanted to start a company in business school, and last mile is where we started. So
That's awesome. So you guys
yeah,
both went to Chicago Business School together. That's where you met him, or were you buddies in
yeah.
Westchester?
No, yeah, we met in business school. So we delivered packages for a little bit, then we brokered freight for a little bit, and then we raised money and built software. So
So you're basically Facebook. Like FreshX is the next Facebook. Started in college, meet a buddy. Except for don't be Zuckerberg.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so Lance and you get it going. Let's talk business now. How did you scale it up? I know that you guys are still, I guess, probably we're definitely a startup, but you're like not pre-revenue. Now you're scaling. You've got funding. How do you look at hiring? What does that look like for you? Do you hire ahead? Do you try to stay as lean as possible? I kind of probably know that answer, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think we lean towards being lean, typically. So we try to do as much as we can with the resources we have before we scale up. We initially hired 3 developers, and I think we won't need too many more developers for a little while.
Yeah,
Um, Especially with how many tools there are coming out every day now to make development easier. And then yeah, we hired once we got about 30 customers, we decided to hire a sales team. And so we decided that we had enough proof of concept and enough traction that we had a scalable sales cycle. So we hired 2 sales folks, Nick and Luke, who joined us in April and May. So pretty recent. We just got an office space in Chicago that I'm working out of with Nick and Luke. Um,
nice.
and we're just working out of there and selling software.
You know what? In a past life, I would have said, I hope I talk to you in 2 years and you have 40 sales reps and a huge office in Chicago. But now, having run a business for 5 years, I hope I talk to you in 2 years and you're doing 10x the revenue and it's just still you, Nick, and Luke. That would be dope. Because I really think, just like development, sales is scalable now if you have a SaaS tool that really works. If the product works, you don't need a ton of people to sell it because the closing rate's high. If the closing rate and the churn is low, closing rate high, churn low, just keep with a small team and make sure they're killers.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that would be my philosophy anyways. And it used to be, I wanted to have 100 employees because I thought that would be cool. It is not cool. It's way cooler to have a lean company and everybody contributes in a meaningful way.
yeah, yeah.
How
And we're currently looking for a product manager. So that's one role we're hiring for right now, just to help us shape and really pinpoint down the medium to longer term roadmap and help with design of current features in the pipeline. So, but after that, we'll be at 10 full timers, and we'll probably stay there for the next 6 to 12 months.
That's awesome. And you guys are going towards Series A? Are you in seed or you already did Series A?
We raised a pre-seed round,
Okay,
and it was a good size pre-seed round. But we're moving towards a seed round, which
nice.
um, we're tentatively planning for early to mid next year.
I actually think a lot of business is not luck, but timing does play into it. You guys started in the bottom of the cycle. And I just think like what an advantage that FreshX has to be in pre-seed in this venture cycle compared to trying to get to Series A or B right now. Because everything's a down round for a lot of these companies. And you guys are in a position to grow and not have a down round. So how do you look at, I mean, I was talking to you about being technical, but you don't write all the code, which I think because you're running the company and you're probably going out and fundraising, that's your job.
Mhm.
So how do you look at going to market, fundraising, hiring? Like, do you delegate any of that? Are you doing, 12, 15-hour days? What's your work life look like?
I'm doing a lot of hours right now, but I'm trying to focus as much as I can on kind of like fundraising, partnerships, integrations, those kinds of things. Hiring, of course,
Yeah.
is where I'm spending a lot of my time. And one of the reasons we're hiring for a product manager is because I'm currently still doing a lot of product design
Yeah.
and requirement documentation and stuff like that, and I need to free up my time to focus on the more important big picture things. So,
For
um,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, only so
I
many
mean,
hours in a day.
product management, I think that people have like a misconception of what a product manager is. They're the people that talk to the sales, the customers, the brokers, and
Yeah.
the dev team and decide what's the priority and how fast it can get out. And they're always in trouble. Like someone's always mad at a product manager, probably a sales rep, and then sometimes the dev team because they're like, hey, we can't, that's not in the next sprint. It is It'll be interesting. I'll have you back on maybe in a year to see how that went. I've seen a lot of people struggle transitioning to a product manager because you
Mhm.
have the ultimate authority. Like people might be mad at you, but you're the CEO. And so they're like, well, it's his company. But they
Yeah.
do get mad at product managers. And then there's always like a political play there, office politics.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that from what I've seen, in freight tech, a lot of product managers, a lot of freight tech companies are structured where there's a lot of sort of like tops down product direction, and product managers are uh, more of designers versus like talking to a lot of customers and
Mhm.
shaping the product roadmap. We want to hire more of a product leader who can be shaping the product roadmap and taking business problems and turning them into product solutions.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
It's a fun company, FreshX, because you get to talk to brokers who all do things differently, and they all have a different need for LTL reefer. And they might, I imagine the way you're going to build it out and have been building it is, hey, this broker said that it'd be cool to have a tool like this. What do we think? Would it be cool to have a tool like this? Should we build that? It's kind of a fun thing.
yeah,
Instead of just brokering freight, which is not a fun thing right now for anybody brokering freight. Even if they say it's fun, it's really not at the moment. But you did start at the bottom. Okay, so let's talk future. you're looking for 10 employees. What do you think FreshX, and this is the fun part for you, what do you think FreshX is going to do for the industry? I know you're a big dreamer because you're a founder and you raised some money and you've got a cool software product. So what are you going to do to the industry?
Yeah, I mean, our like really big picture vision is just increasing visibility and collaboration for cold chain services. So we're currently really focused on this niche, the Reefer LTL quoting tool.
Yeah.
We're gonna start to build more things to help with different parts of those transactions, and then expand a little bit multimodal. We're working with some truckload carriers to get truckload options on the platform. Might be a different kind of module or different tab, but different types of capacity. Because our big picture vision is make capacity easier to find, make it easier to get instant pricing on different types of capacity, and especially in the cold chain, it's kind of hard to find those specialized providers that have the right permits
Yeah.
and hold the right commodities. And you get into LTL, it's specifically difficult to handle. So um, that's what we're focused on. We're building out the truckload piece. We're building out pool quoting feature right now, where you can run a distribution kind of quoting process out of one point to multiple destinations. We're working on aggregating consignee data, facility data for different facilities, which will help carriers with decision making, and brokers and shippers with decision making. And we are also building out a cross dock, a cold storage cross dock network. It's almost like a directory or Airbnb for cold storage type of
That's
product,
pretty cool. Yeah.
where the OS&D is a big problem in cold chain when
Yeah.
shipment gets rejected at a facility and you got to scramble, and that falls on it can fall on the shipper, the carrier, or the broker. And so we're going to
Especially if
build
it's an enterprise shipper, it falls on the broker. I've taken many of lumps from that. I had a customer who was shipping chicken, and we had the carrier there on time. They delivered or tried to, and the shipper or the receiver rejected the load
Mhm.
because it wasn't even like the shipper's fault. The receiver rejected it because they actually didn't need it that day. And so they had us come back the next day. Well, in Reefer truckload, this isn't like, yo, yeah, just come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
So you have to keep it cool and chill. Then he went back the next day, couldn't get an appointment. They rejected it again when he finally got in there. And then it was my job as the broker, which I don't work with this customer anymore. I don't like them, but they're a big enterprise shipper, and they basically said, "Hey, you figure out a way to dispose of the chicken, and we'll file the claim against you."
Mhm.
And it was a $40,000 claim, and they just short paid invoices for $40,000. There's
Yeah.
nothing I could do. I just took it in the shorts, and I had to deliver the chicken to like a Petco because the dogs ate it.
How did you find the Petco in that case?
I just went on Google and called people until I said,
Yeah.
"Would you
Okay.
take a full truckload of chicken?"
Yeah, I mean,
And
that's what people do today
it
is
was terrible. That's why
you
I
scroll
avoided
around
them.
Google Maps and call up every cold storage potential warehouse that might take it. And
Yeah.
so we're like, okay, this is pretty easy for us to do. We already have a network of LTL reefer carriers, and we know what temperatures all their warehouses run at, and they have over 100 cold storage cross docks across their network. So
Yep.
we'll just start with that, and then add more of those options and collect all the data on what temperatures they do, what services they offer, can they rework a pallet, what hours can they take things at, just make that process a little bit easier to manage.
Yeah, that's my favorite. My least favorite story is that happened to me after I had fired an employee, and that was a load that he had been working, and so I fired an employee and lost $40,000 in the same weekend. It
Oof.
was not a fun weekend. I didn't even know about the load. I got called by the carrier, "Hey, I couldn't deliver this." And then, one of the things that people don't talk about very often in brokerage is all the things that go wrong. I filed the insurance claim, and they're like, "Yeah, was it the carrier's fault?" And I'm like, "No, it was the receiver's fault." And they're like, "Okay, we're not paying the claim."
Oh.
So never got made whole. But I mean, I only tell that story because it's so relevant to when you're talking about cold storage. That's a big problem. If you have a load rejected, where do you put it? You can't. You could have the carrier bring it back to the shipper, but in this case, the shipper was more of like a broker of food, and they don't have a
Hmm.
storage facility. They were just tendering, they were brokering the U.S. foods to some place,
Hmm.
and so that's just how it goes, and that's why people avoid it. So if you're coming up with a solution for that, that would be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, and it's a little bit timely for us to build this right now because now there's a lot of extra cold storage capacity in the market, and so
Yeah.
cold storage providers are trying to find things to do with that space. So short-term storage is actually a high margin opportunity, and so yeah, it's that's in the near term pipeline. That'll be out probably this year, later this year.
That's pretty interesting. So I want to dig in for the audience that are brokers that maybe do some reefer, but maybe they don't do that much, but they could, and they've avoided it like me. What items, you're the former reefer broker. What
Hmm.
items do people ship that would be relevant? Like I'm thinking food, but I mean, ice cream, but what else is there? There's probably much more than I can just name.
Yeah, LTL reefer, mostly you're looking at food and beverage. It's just if you're doing hazardous materials and stuff, it's usually hard to pair it with food.
Yeah.
So most of, probably almost all of what we see is food and beverage. If I could break it down, I could probably cover like 80% of the commodities. It's like meat, poultry, seafood, um,
Seafood. Yeah.
dairy products, juices, and like juice concentrate is one that we see a lot running LTL reefer. Um, Different like kinds of like dressings and different like liquids that are in small batches. Um, like nuts and beverages. There's a lot of alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages shipping on the platform.
And is that because they just can't get too warm? They just need to be temp controlled.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So sometimes they're either running chilled or they're running more like temp controlled. So there's three ranges that LTL reefers carriers kind of categorize themselves as. There's frozen, chilled, and we call it ambient, which is that's like that 55-degree range where you usually ship wine and chocolate
Oh,
and some
nice.
other stuff. And then there's some weirder ranges like pharmaceutical products will run in the 40s, and it's harder to consolidate freight because there's not enough other stuff that you can consolidate at that temperature.
Yeah.
So most of the carriers will typically run at around 0 degrees, around 34 degrees, or around 55 degrees.
That's some inside knowledge that most people don't know. Thanks for sharing that, Clay.
Yeah,
So you've got all these ranges. I imagine on the platform, you would be able to, when you're getting the quote, determine what temperature, and then you guys are matching the range of carriers that would say, "Hey, we do those ranges on these lanes." And
yeah.
so, talk more about the product from an LTL guy standpoint. LTL is normally actually pretty easy these days for like standard LTL to get
Hmm.
rates and hit the APIs. I maybe 5 to probably 10 years ago, it was still all SMC3 Mercury Gate. You got to have like a czar light tariff to be able to rate against it and have a way to procure that in a TMS. Now everything is API. Every major carrier, you can hit their API for a quote, dispatch, tracking, documents, all that stuff.
Yep.
So if you have rates, you just load them. And then it's more like Expedia. You can just rate shop all of them at once in a platform. You had to build an engine because they don't have APIs. You're just emailing. So you built an engine with a bunch of logic, right? That just
Yep.
says, hey, all these carriers can cover these lanes. Did you do it by zip code, by region? What kind of tech did you use to do that?
It's by zip code. It's down to the 5-digit zip code. We ended up
Nice.
building some in-house tools to create regions using a map. So if we're working with a carrier, it's like we're working closely with them. We're pulling up a map. We're like creating a region on the screen by drawing on the map, and then we're able to visually is just the easiest way to do this. A lot of times you see carriers trying to work off of 3-digit zip codes and like
Yeah.
setting these as regions. And that's just, if you look at 3-digit zip codes on a map, it's just crazy. It makes no sense. So,
Yeah, it's not like
um,
next to each other, left,
yeah,
right, center. It's all over the state, whatever state
yeah,
they're talking about.
yep, yep. So we're doing that. We're working on developing standardized like freight regions, and so it'll be like really easy to just say, hey, I want to create a lane from Chicago to Miami, and then put this rate sheet on it, and it's very seamless.
Mhm.
Or maybe I want to adjust pricing on that lane.
That's what I
So
was going to say. How do they adjust pricing? Are the carriers working with FreshX to adjust their pricing? The broker benefits from you guys working with the carrier, or does the platform just kind of move as it goes? If a carrier updates, they just let you know that they updated it and it's already live.
yeah, usually the carriers don't update pricing that much. We do update fuel prices weekly, so the surcharge is going to change.
Hmm.
Most of the carriers will give us rate sheets that are good for a year.
Yeah.
That being said, they do sometimes update the rates throughout the year. If they open up a new lane, then they'll give us rates for that. If they close down a lane, they'll let us know. Maybe they start running one lane a lot more frequently, and so they want to offer more competitive pricing on that lane. So they can update their pricing throughout the year, but most of the time it's relatively static. Um, and I think that's kind of an opportunity. Uh,
Yeah.
Carriers could be more dynamic in the way that they rate. It's sort of this balance of simplicity versus accuracy, where they want to make things simple for their customers, so they don't want to create add too much complexity into their rate structure, and they want to allow their customers to um, be able to rely on rates for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
But at the same time, then they're under optimizing for certain things, fluctuations in their operations, fluctuations in the market, and so it's that trade
Like
off.
ABF rates dynamic pricing, they started doing that, and then all the LTL carriers tried to come out with their own version of dynamic. And I think the only one that does it well is Avrit. There are other dynamic pricings. XPO says theirs is good, but
Yeah.
it's always dynamically bad for me. Anytime it's dynamic, it's too expensive. But I don't know, like the audience that's listening to this, but ABF in 2021 came out with this dynamic pricing. And I mean, they had this tech that would say, hey, their line hauls or their, pickup and delivery trucks, when they consolidated at the terminals, they had extra space to go on
Yeah.
line haul trucks. They wanted to keep them out. So they would just drop their pricing by like 30% on the API. And like there was a few months where ABF was like our number one carrier by 50% because our customers were booking based on rate and they were just hitting quote, and the ABF was beating Central Transport. And if you read Scooter Sayers or anybody else's like quarterly earnings reviews on LTL carriers, ABF adjusted that over the last 2 years because they're like, that was a bad idea. Now let's optimize our dynamic. So now dynamic in the LTL world is not that much cheaper and a little bit interesting to make sure you get the right quoted amount and how long the quote's good for. But dynamic pricing for carriers like this, that's always opportunity. If they are going to basically, if they're not going to win the freight because their rate's too high because it's static and they're just missing out on revenue that they could have gotten for a lower price, but still been profitable.
Yeah, and we do have one carrier who we're pulling rates in through an API. So most of our carriers are rate sheets. One is
Yep.
using an API, and they actually are the only one that's, I guess, dynamic pricing, where they're actually changing the rate
Yeah.
structures on a daily basis based on how their operations change. And they are one of the top carriers on the platform in
Yeah.
terms of volume that's going to them. Um, so it does work. What one thing we're going to do is start to give carriers tools so they can update their rates throughout the year, and give them some indications around win rates. And if they're underpricing a lane, they can increase pricing. If they're overpricing a lane, they can lower pricing.
Yeah.
Um, but a more transparency around that is good for everyone, because they're going to end up rejecting less loads. They're going to end up being more competitive on loads they do win. They're going to end up
Yeah.
getting the lanes they want, and so it ends up benefiting everyone.
I think if the carrier and the broker know where they need to be, it's just a better relationship. And you're just in the middle. You're not a middleman. You're just procuring those two being able to see what rates they need to get. So that's kind of an interesting iteration you guys can make is dynamic pricing there. That'd be pretty cool to see. So we're going to wrap up here because I got to go to a meeting. It's like we're running businesses or something, but, and we had some technical difficulties in the middle. So this might not be an hour, but we're close. A couple of questions for you. What's your tech stack for running the business? And so is it like QuickBooks, NetSuite, Stripe? Like, what are you doing to invoice customers? How do you do the subscription stuff? How do you do your books? Like all that stuff. Just give it all away if you'd be willing.
Yeah, I don't know, we outsource as much as we can. Like I don't want to be spending a week every month doing administrative work. So
Yeah.
like we use Gusto for all of our HR and administrative stuff, benefits, payroll.
Yeah.
Gusto is an awesome product.
I use
Uh,
Gusto. They're great.
yeah, it's great. And we use Stripe for billing. We use PandaDoc for all of our contracting. So PandaDoc integrates with Stripe. And so you can send
Really?
somebody a contract, they sign the contract, it takes them to a payment page, they can put in their credit card, and it's all one seamless process.
And then
So
is
that
that a subscription? So like Stripe has the ability with PandaDoc, like every month it'll just hit the same card that they stored, or how does that work?
Yep, yep. Yeah, they just hit the same card, so it's a nice seamless process. If the card, gets declined or whatever, or it changes, it'll send the right notifications. So you can be pretty hands off. You rarely have to jump in and
Yeah.
facilitate something. Um, so we use that. We use Slack internally just for communication. Slack's great. I like how well you can connect to other organizations, and so you
Yeah.
can. Like we have our accounting firm in our Slack channel through an external connection. We have we use some offshore folks for different things, and we have connections to those agencies through Slack. So it's
Nice.
just a really nice kind of place to do everything. Um,
What about
I don't know.
Gmail or Microsoft? Which one are you?
We're on Gmail. We're on
Yeah, I
Gmail.
figured when you said Slack, you're on Gmail. Otherwise, you'd be using Teams.
Yeah.
Gmail all the way, and we're also using Slack and Stripe and Gusto. Although we're still on QuickBooks for some of our actual freight brokerage invoices, although we're building our own now. So then you've got all that. What's your biggest learning opportunity when you've been building these two, pivoting from the last mile to the brokerage to the software? What was the mistakes you made that if you didn't have to make it and you could still be at the same point? So it can't be a formative mistake like I screwed up and that's what led us to the software. But what mistakes did you make that is just, I didn't need to do that, and someone else can hear it and say, I'll just avoid that mistake as I build the business?
Um, I think I mean, it took us a while to get to where we are, and maybe we could have made the right pivots faster if we like kind of like listened to our customers quicker and like really dug in when we heard certain things and then really
Yeah.
evaluated those shifts versus like continuing to go down a rabbit hole. So
You're a
like
little stubborn. You said, I'm going to make this idea work. This freight brokerage is
yeah,
going to
yeah. I mean
work.
we realized pretty quickly that the brokerage was going to be pretty difficult to scale and to do what we wanted to do. But we ended up brokering freight for like 6 months, which is a lot shorter
That's
of
a
a
pretty
time
quick
frame
pivot
than
still, though. You
yeah,
give yourself some
it's
credit. That's a
shorter
quick
than some
pivot.
other tech companies took to do this, but it still was for a pre-seed startup with only like less than a year of cash runway, that's an eternity.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
literally.
I think what we could have done better there was take what we as soon as we felt like we're learning, we're hearing something from our customers, and we're seeing there's a need for something else, just like really dig in there and do all we can to have those conversations with our customers and make sure we're going down the right path. Which we ended up doing, and it ended up working out. It's just I think it could have been a little bit more direct.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you just giving that advice, especially since you're new. Like that just happened a year ago or whatever it was, and like being able to reflect and say, I could have done that quicker. I will say you're not giving yourself enough credit. You did pivot quick enough. And in business, the only rule and the only goal is to stay in business. And then you're winning if you're still in business. So you pivoted quick enough. Appreciate the time, Clay. I got to run. Where do people find you? LinkedIn, email? What's the best way to get a hold of Clay if I'm a broker and I say, I'm going to try this reefer thing?
Yeah, LinkedIn is fine. You can go on our website www.getfreshx.com. Reach out through the website or book a demo with Nick on there. So please reach out. Happy to do demos and chat Reefer LTL.
All right, man. Appreciate it. Have a great day. We'll see you.
All right, thank you.